Hello, everybody. Never fear. Between the 20s is back here with our Risers and Fallers episode through the first 4 weeks of the fantasy football season. I'm here, Bryce Weisholtz, as always, joined by Amer and Mike. Guys, how are you doing?
I am doing great, Bryce. Thank you for asking. The UChicago Sports Business Association is back on the UChicago campus, and boy, we are leaving at large after the first weekend. Shout out to Vice President Ben for having the three of us, the podcast amigos, over to his place to watch the games. We finally had a chance to experience an NFL Sunday all together, and it was a lot of fun. I got to realize how much more I know than both of you about fantasy football.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, whatever you say, Mike. It was definitely a big weekend, but we'll see about that fantasy football knowledge. We can test that and see who's the most right by the end of the season.
Oh, well, I can give you a little preview. I'm pretty sure it's going to be me. I'm looking pretty good in my leagues right now. But to give you guys
What about O.J. Howard?
That's fair. We'll talk about him. But to give you all a preview of what we're going to do today, if you remember from our very first show, we did our top 50 overall rankings. We'll reference that throughout the show today. But we're going to talk about 8 different guys, a quarterback, running back, receiver, and tight end, 1 riser and 1 faller throughout the first 4 games of this season. Just to kind of see where the 3 of us would all think about each of these players. And we'll do 1 for each position. And without further ado, we can jump in now with the quarterbacks. And our first quarterback is the riser, Baltimore QB Lamar Jackson. His ADP was QB 14. He was not ranked in our top 50. Currently, he sits at QB 1, ahead of guys like Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers. Were you guys expecting this? What do you think about him? Is he going to sustain this?
So I think we should pump the brakes a little bit on the Lamar Jackson train. I mean, if you look at first 4 weeks, obviously he's, as you said, the quarterback 1, so has been very successful. But you got to dig a little deeper. Look at the defenses he's playing. Week 1 at Miami, one of the worst defenses in the league. Week 2, Arizona, awful team. Week 3 at Kansas City, deceptively poor defense. That's why every one of their games is a freaking shootout. And the fact that their offense is so fast-paced and really just gets down the field quickly allows the other offense to take the field. It sort of runs up that score. And then most recently against Cleveland, not an outstanding defensive team by any means, more of an offensive threat. So I'm pumping the brakes on Lamar Jackson hard. Coming up, for example, Week 7, they see Seattle. Week 9, they see New England. Week 11, they see the Texans. Week 12, the Rams. They're going to have some tough tests. 14, the Bills. So I would pump the brakes on the Lamar Jackson wagon right now.
Yeah, I agree a little bit to some extent. I think it's been amazing what Lamar Jackson's been able to do. He killed it. Obviously, he's being carried somewhat by his Week 1 performance against the atrocious Miami defense, and then, of course, Week 2 against the also atrocious Arizona defense. So those 2 games are really carrying him at this point. But I will say his rushing statistics and his rushing prowess really help him keep that high floor that you want from a quarterback. And he was talked about, like we said, around QB 14, which is on the fringe of a starter. But no one really saw this coming. I'm a fan of Lamar Jackson in fantasy this year. I think he finishes as a top 5 guy, and I am trying to get as many shares of him as I can. I think he's a week-in, week-out starter from now on this year.
I think on that, though, it's always dangerous to see a rushing quarterback go later into the year because eventually those injuries, not the injuries, but the hits start sort of wearing on you a little bit, and maybe you're a little bit more hesitant to leave the pocket.
Amer, I agree. He is absolutely a weekly starter, QB1 in any league on any team. That being said, I do think the passing stats are going to regress. His options just aren't that great. I'm not a Hollywood Brown fan. I do like Mark Andrews, but even he's getting double teamed. And Lamar Jackson, I don't know if you – well, I actually do know because I was with you guys. We watched some of the Baltimore game on Sunday. And he was throwing Lamar Jackson Lamar Jackson was throwing to Andrews in double coverage all the time. Just not great passing decisions. I don't think that he is going to improve as a passer from what he is right now. I think he's going to regress, but the rushing stats do help. I was going to say even after that slow start, he only had 6 rushing yards against Miami. It was then 120 in Week 2, 46 in Week 3 with a touchdown, and then 66 in Week 4. I think that's only going to go up.
So what do you guys think? Where do you guys see him finishing by the end of this year?
QB 7, QB 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a little inflated just because of the quarterback injuries that we've seen so far. I mean, Drew Brees is out for a while, Roethlisberger's out for the year, so that moves you up, like, I'd say 2 slots. I'd probably and Cam Newton has been out for the last 2 weeks, so I'd put him right about quarterback 6. Once you start, if you're this far of the season at quarterback 1, it's hard to really fall below 10.
Definitely. So now we talked about our riser, Lamar Jackson, and now for one of the more obvious followers of the show of fantasy football, Cleveland quarterback Baker Mayfield. We talked about him a lot. He is currently the QB 23. He, like Lamar Jackson, was not ranked in our top 50, but his ADP was QB 5. Guys, we've talked about Baker Mayfield a ton on the podcast already. Is there anything more that you want to say on him? Are the concerns growing? Do you see him bouncing back at all? Where do you see him finishing?
I mean, during the offseason, I could be seen next to the Cleveland Browns hype train holding a yield sign. Now, however, I think it does turn the opposite direction. Everybody's saying that the Browns are out. They say Freddie Kitchens is not going to help this offense work. I think the opposite. We saw they played a good defense week 4. They played Baltimore. Baker was 20 for 30, 342 yards, touchdown and a pick, only 1 sack, big rushing performance with 3 attempts for 1 yard. But I feel that this offense is finally coalescing and really is going to storm through the league through the end of the season. I mean, maybe not storm through the league. That might be a little bit too strong, but definitely see some more consistent performance for Baker Mayfield. I see him rising all the way up to, say, a QB 9, right below where Lamar Jackson will finish.
Yeah, I'm with you. I can't see him finishing anywhere close to where he's at right now at QB 23. That's just insane for Baker Mayfield. This offense is too talented to let that happen. There were a lot of promising signs in this Week 4 matchup against the Ravens. They put up 40 points. It was a must-win game for them. Really, honestly, you could say it saved their season so far. Biggest win of Baker's career so far. He's played some great ball this past weekend, and I think they'll just get better. And just one thing to note, he did all this with Odell having a really poor game. Odell Beckham Jr. only had 2 catches, and they still were able to put up 40 yards. If they get Odell, Jarvis Landry, and Nick Chubb rolling and as productive as we think they can be, this offense could be almost unstoppable. So I think it'll still take some time, and he has had a tough start. So I'm right with Mike. I say he finishes around QB 10, 11 to finish off the season. Baker Mayfield is going to trend up moving forward.
I'm with both of you guys. What's very encouraging to me is the issue with Baker has not been the yards. He's been over 300 yards twice in 4 weeks, and of those other 2, he was 285 once. That's solid yardage. The issue has been the passing touchdowns. He only has 4 passing touchdowns across 4 weeks, and that's good for 1 touchdown roughly every 35 attempts. The league average is about 6%. That's way below that. And I don't know what is going on. I think that's going to reverse. The talent he has at wide receiver is way too good. And the interceptions are going down. He threw 3 brutal picks week 1 against Tennessee. But since then, it was 1 each week against the Jets, the Rams, and against Baltimore, which is huge. That's a great defense. So for him to control the ball the way he did was very, very good and put up 342 yards to boot on just 30 attempts. So now moving into the running backs. Our running back riser, this is a guy that personally I was particularly low on during our ranking show. Tennessee running back Derrick Henry, currently sitting at RB7. And then in our rankings from that first show, we had him ranked 41st overall, good for RB22. So he's now jumped from low-end running back 2 to a mid-tier running back 1. Do you guys see this continuing in a pretty rough Tennessee Titan offense?
Personally, I don't see it continuing, and that's just because Tennessee really lacks a lot of offensive weapons. As a Corey Davis owner, I realize that for sure. I mean, when their wide receiver 1 is a guy who literally put up a goose egg week 1, I think on like less than 5 targets, that's just awful. And they seem to be trying to focus on the run game through the first few games of the year. But I think that teams can figure out one dimension of your game. So if you're a strong running team, teams can figure out how to stop the run. That's why you have to be both dynamic passing and rushing the football. And I don't think the Titans have the ability to do that. So going forward, I feel that teams are going to focus on locking down Derrick Henry more than worrying about the passing game. So maybe Corey Davis's stock goes up. I doubt by more than really to be fantasy relevant, but I do expect Derrick Henry's to go down from this point. As a matter of fact, you just kind of see that from his performance. He had a big week 1 against the Browns. Now he's had less points week by week. So week 2, less points than week 1, week 3, less than week 2, week 4, less than week 3. So I see Derrick Henry continuing on that trajectory, maybe not necessarily to the point where he keeps going down through week 16, but something like that.
Yep, 100% agree on Derrick Henry. It was a really, really good week 1. He had that monster screen reception that was taken. He took 75 yards to the house. So that's a ton of fantasy points, and that's almost half his fantasy points for that first week. And that's really carrying him up to this RB7 that he's at right now. So I do think he's going to cool off, but one thing to note, he's going to have a ton of volume. He's averaging more than 20 rushes per game. So that's a really good floor for Derrick Henry. One thing I will say, though, is I think he's one of the most game script dependent guys in the NFL. This past week, he had 27 attempts, but that was because they were leading the Atlanta Falcons for pretty much the whole game. I don't think that's going to happen very often. The Tennessee Titans are not a great team. So we'll see what happens. I do not expect him to finish within the top 12 running backs. I think he'll be closer to 15 to finish off the season.
That's exactly where I have him. Running back 15, 14, that kind of range. Amer, you said it. It's the volume, and that will carry every single running back, even if your efficiency is rather low. He is averaging under 4 yards a carry the last couple of weeks. It's just he's going to get his carries, which will keep him afloat. He just offers zero passing upside. He's averaging 2.2 targets per game. Even though Deion Lewis has been a non-factor, the offense isn't good. They play in very low-scoring games because the defense is good. I wasn't high on him to begin with from the rankings show, but I have upped my stock on him now to about an RB14, RB15.
Yeah, just one thing to note, he's only surpassed 100 yards once this season. That was obviously last week against Atlanta. He did get exactly 100 yards, and that was on 27 carries. You're thinking with that kind of volume, he should be getting more yards than that, especially against an Atlanta defense that has shown to not be great against stopping the run.
Definitely. And now for the flip side, like Baker, this running back has been talked about a lot on this podcast, and I'm sure on many other podcasts our listeners listen to. James Conner, the running back in Pittsburgh, we had him 6th overall, RB5, that is entrenched as an elite RB1, currently sitting at RB21, which is inflated by a good week against Cincinnati on Monday night. Was that enough of a good sign for you guys to cool off, to heat up on him a little bit, or are you still cooling him down?
Yeah, going back to that Monday night game, I think Connor wishes it took place in Vegas because his his longest rush and longest catch both went for 21 yards. That's a blackjack if I've ever seen one. But I mean, the frustrating thing about being a James Conner owner is that you can excuse away his season so far. Week 1 at New England, tough matchup. Week 2, Seattle, another tough defense. He performed okay. He had 33 yards, got in the end zone. So that helped him out a little bit. Week 3 at San Francisco, an undefeated team at the time. Another not necessarily difficult matchup, or a pretty relatively difficult matchup, but now entering into a week against a easier matchup in the Bengals, he comes through for you as a fantasy owner. So this leaves you in limbo, which obviously is not what you want from your first round pick. If you're left in limbo by your first round pick, you have to be very frustrated. And that's why I think James Conner is absolutely a faller. But once again, I mean, theoretically, he could return to being an okay pick, but I don't see him coming back to, I think maybe best case scenario, James Conner finishes as a RB8 on the season.
Yeah, I agree with that. I even think that RB8 is a little bit optimistic. He has had a tough start, and this last week against Cincy was promising. But what I am most concerned about is his rushing. He's only eclipsed 12 rushes once. He had 13 against San Francisco. He only turned that into 43 rushing yards. So he has struggled, and he isn't getting a ton of work. I think Jalen Samuels has been getting a lot of work. Mike Tomlin seems to like Jalen Samuels, and they've been trying a lot of trick plays, some college offense. We saw some Wildcat with Jalen Samuels this past week. So I'm not really sure what to think about James Conner yet. He did have a good game. He is involved in the passing game, which is good. But I am concerned about James Conner. I don't think he's going to finish as a top 10 running back, which is tough to swallow for fantasy owners that drafted him within the top 10 overall. But just where he's been so far and just these questions that the Steelers have on offense, I am not optimistic about James Conner. I think he finishes around 12 or 11.
The one thing you can't plan for in fantasy football is bad coaching. And Mike Tomlin has done just that. He's ruined fantasy seasons with this. For some reason, he is going to Jalen Samuels exactly as much as James Conner. Look at this stat from last week. James Conner, 10 rushes. Jalen Samuels, 10 rushes. James Conner, 8 targets. Jalen Samuels, 8 targets. James Conner, 8 receptions. Jalen Samuels, 8 receptions, which makes no sense because James Conner was exactly twice as more efficient as Jalen Samuels. I don't understand what's going on. James Conner was averaging 4.2 yards per carry. He had 83 receiving yards and a touchdown through the air, an average of 10.4. He's the superior guy, and if Mike Tomlin sees that, he will be an RB1. But until they do, the guy's a borderline RB2. I just can't really trust him. Moving to the wide receivers now. A pleasant surprise amid all the Melvin Gordon drama in Los Angeles. Keenan Allen, the Charger receiver, he did come into the season on our rankings 23rd overall, so that is going to be a round 2 or 3 swing. And wide receiver 10, so a wide receiver 1 in terms of ranking here. But no one could have foreseen the start that he had. Wide receiver 1 overall in all formats. Guys, is this for real, and is this maintained with Melvin Gordon returning?
Well, that's the question here. Is it retained with Melvin Gordon returning? So looking at Keenan Allen, through 4 weeks, even though he's the number 1 wide receiver in football, he's only had 2 weeks where he eclipsed 100 yards. And the only thing that he has really going for him in making him an elite fantasy receiver is the fact that he's scored 3 touchdowns so far this season. In the week where he scored a touchdown in PPR formats, he's gotten more than 25 points. When he hasn't, he's gotten less than 20 points each week, including a 9.8 PPR performance against the Dolphins this past week, which is understandable because a little bit of a game script changed. But if Melvin Gordon's coming back, I definitely have to be concerned about the fact that Keenan Allen might not be getting in the end zone as much as before. So that's why I think I'm a little concerned about Keenan Allen going forward. I see him probably finishing on the bubble of a wide receiver 1. Probably wide receiver 13, I'd say.
Wow.
At the end of the year. Yeah, at the end of the year. Wide receiver 13.
I am very on the flip side. I'm optimistic about Keenan Allen. I love what I've seen so far from him. He's been killer. He's been the best wide receiver in football so far for the Chargers. As we've said in fantasy, he's wide receiver 1. He's getting a ton of yards, ton of targets, ton of touchdowns. And I don't really see that changing. I do think he's going to take a slight dip just because of Melvin Gordon's involvement in the passing game, along with, of course, Austin Eckler, who's been there. But the combination of those two guys will eat into his targets a little bit. But I don't think that'll be a big problem. I think with Mike Williams banged up, with Hunter Henry out for at least 4 more weeks, he's going to be a target monster. He's the best pass catcher in this offense. It's a high-powered offense. Still got Phillip Rivers there. I think he's going to be money in the bank. I see him finishing as a top 5 wide receiver this year.
I might be even more optimistic. I don't think there's any way Keenan Allen finishes below wide receiver 3 in half and full PPR. Just look at the numbers. His first 3 weeks, 10 targets, 15 targets, 17 targets against Houston. Yes, he only had 6, but that's game script against Miami. Yardage, 123 week 1, 183 in week 3. Both of those were his only games where he eclipsed 100 yards. But then week 2 was 98. So it's effectively 100 yards again. Targets mean so much. That's why Michael Thomas is so good, apart from the fact that his catch percentage is like 90% with Drew Brees. But Keenan Allen, I don't see him slowing down. Targets are a huge, huge part of being a receiver. It's almost guaranteed touches. He's wide receiver 3 or better when he finishes the season. I don't think there's any question. On the flip side, though, guy also that we've talked about, this is probably the biggest concern in fantasy football. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's a stretch. Stefon Diggs came into the year 31 overall on our rankings, wide receiver 13, borderline wide receiver 1. Even with a decent week against the Bears last week, he sits in half PPR at wide receiver 59. 59. That is not where anyone saw him. Are you guys concerned? Is this a real concern?
Yeah, let me set the scene for you here, Bryce.
Paint me a word picture, Michael.
You're in the 4th round of your 12-team draft. You've taken 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds. Round 3, you took a wide receiver. To round out the first 4 picks, you're looking for another wide receiver. You're praying Stefon Diggs doesn't come off the board. You're praying. You have the 38th overall pick. We have him ranked at 31. He keeps falling. 38th pick. 5 seconds elapse. ESPN barely opens that draft button so that for the idiots that make the mistake in the first 3 seconds. You pick Stefon Diggs. All is good. Until the Vikings decide that their offense is going to be the most run-heavy offense in the entire league. Through the first 4 weeks, though. I think going forward, we'll see Diggs come back to life. It's been very rough for Diggs owners after that odyssey of picking him in the 4th round. Let's see how rough it has been. First week, 6 points. Second week, 10. Third, 4. But week 4, a little bit of a bounce back against a very good Bears defense. 16 points total, rounding around. I think that Diggs is going to have a bit of a comeback. I don't think he's going to come back to where he was drafted, but I do think that he definitely will come back as Minnesota begins to adjust. Remember, first 4 weeks of the season, teams are feeling each other out. They're not going to let Dalvin Cook run them all over anymore. Diggs is going to see some targets. I mean, the problem is on that team that you look across the field, they have another very capable wide receiver in Adam Thielen, but I still think that if they are going to pass the ball more, which seems inevitable, I mean, face it, Diggs isn't going to average 4 targets for the rest of the year. I think it's going to increase, and with that, I think we'll see a overall production increase. I think that in the future, Diggs is going to be borderline, I'd say wide receiver 21. Let's go blackjack, 21.
All right, after that thrilling story of Mike's draft, we know that happened to him firsthand. I agree. There's obviously nowhere but up to go with Stefon Diggs. He's at wide receiver 59 is atrocious. It is a horrific start for Stefon Diggs. He's had a really tough go so far this year. And it's not really his fault. It's just more on the offense. Dalvin Cook has been an absolute machine. And honestly, I'm a little bit less optimistic about Stefon Diggs moving forward. I don't see Dalvin Cook slowing down very much. They don't play a horribly difficult schedule. They got Kansas City. They're playing Washington. They're playing the Giants next week. So Dalvin Cook's going to be a beast moving forward. And I just think they're going to run the hell out of the ball. I don't think Kirk Cousins is a very good quarterback. And I think the Vikings know that. So I think it's going to be the Dalvin Cook show. Not very good news for Thielen and Diggs owners. So I see him finishing, could be outside the top 30, but I'll predict he'll be between wide receiver 25 and 30.
I'm right around there. I think he's going to finish on that high end, wide receiver 25. And that's only because of the slow start. If we were talking about 1-2 weeks, if this was baseball and they played 162 games, I think Stefon Diggs is going to be a high-end wide receiver 2.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Bryce. Did you just reference a real sport?
I did.
Oh, that's cool.
I did.
We should do that more.
Quick PSA: baseball postseason starting. Mike's Mets are out. My Yankees are in. Just wanted to say that
They won't.
My Red Sox are
They
out as
won't.
well.
They won't be
thank
for long.
God.
They won't be for long. Their pitching is awful.
Sure.
Their starting pitching. Their bullpen is pretty decent. Anyway,
Oh, the Mets bullpen's another talk for another day. The issue with Stefon Diggs has just been game script. Week 1, Atlanta, they crushed them. Week 3, Oakland, they crushed them. This was going to be running anyway. 2 targets, 3 targets. In the 2 games that they've had with neutral to slightly positive game script, Week 2 against Green Bay, Week 4 against Chicago, both games he had 7 targets. The issue in Week 2 was he only reeled in 1 of them. He had an 8th target and a 2nd touchdown if you count in the one that was called back from a phantom pass interference penalty. Week 4 was encouraging. He caught all 7 balls for 108 yards. And Stefon Diggs has always been known as a high touchdown guy. The fact that he only has 1 touchdown through 4 weeks, to me, says more are coming. I'm not sure it's going to be next week against the Giants just because they're going to run the ball a lot. Dalvin Cook is going to have 1,000 yards rushing in this game. But their schedule gets somewhat better for Stefon Diggs. And Kirk Cousins isn't going to throw the ball 20 times or less most of the time. He threw the ball 36 times on Sunday, 7 targets for Stefon Diggs. That's a pretty good target share. It's 20%. And he goes for 108 yards. I think he'll be fine, but the start was slow enough where he'll finish as a low-end wide receiver too. Now time for the final 2 guys, the final 2 tight ends. Our tight end riser here, and this was actually tough. I speak for all 3 of us. We were trying to decide between 2 guys here, and basically it just came down to one of the guys basically came out of nowhere, and that's who we're going with, and that's Oakland tight end Darren Waller. Darren Waller was not ranked in our top 50 as ADP, tight end 21. Currently, he sits as tight end 6. That is, for those of you doing some math here, that's the top half of tight end 1s. Do you see this continuing? He's got a lot of targets. Can Darren Waller be a reliable week in and week out tight end moving forward?
every time Bryce speaks, I hope you're ready to bring a pen and pencil to do some math. But anyway, I mean, I don't know why they pay us to do shows like this, rise and fall. In reality, what are we witnessing here? Regression to the mean. What our predictions at first were rather sound because they encompass the randomness of the NFL season, ups and downs, and what we're really seeing is just sort of randomly some players having very good weeks, but then will regress eventually, and then we have some players having bad weeks like Stefon Diggs that'll probably regress back to in a more positive light. But then there's the beautiful Darren Waller. The one who comes out of nowhere that we all underestimated because of a systematic error. A systematic error. We did not realize that John Gruden would utilize the tight end in this way. It just totally went under our radar. And now, people who drafted Darren Waller, like yours truly, are in a great spot. I mean, the guy is just... My favorite part about him is you can lock him into the tight end spot. He'll give you at least 10 points a week. You walk away happy. That's what you want from a tight end. You don't want to have to deal with this inconsistency of, 15 points one week, 0 another. No, he's seeing consistent targets, 8, 7, 14, 8 through the first 4 weeks of the season. That is hot stuff. Hot stuff. Still hasn't gotten in the end zone yet. But if he does, imagine you're just getting 6 points on top of already a mid-teen performance. It's fantastic. Love Darren Waller. He is, of all the risers on this list, he is my guy. He is the riser that is going to stay up. He is like a banner that's the Rangers 1994 Stanley Cup champion banner in Madison Square Garden. Stays up at all times. Stays up during Knicks games, Liberty games.
Oh my God.
Kids hockey games. It's there.
That's because the Knicks have nothing else to hang in the rafters.
That's because none of them have
It's
anything
hanging
in the
above
rafters.
all. It's the riser that has remained. That's where I have Darren Waller.
Look, as crazy as that sounds, Mike, I'm with you. Darren Waller's target machine, reception machine, yard machine so far this year. Derek Carr's thrown to him a ton. He's been money in the bank so far, as we said, tight end 6. I think he's going to finish higher than that. I think he's going to finish within the top 5 tight ends this year. He's going to find the end zone eventually, and when he does, that'll be money for whoever's got him in fantasy. I love him this year. He's been great so far, and I think he'll continue that.
The only guys who I can say are guaranteed, and we'll put a little asterisk against the guaranteed because of injuries, to finish higher than Waller.
AKA not guaranteed.
The only guys who I expect to finish higher than Darren Waller for tight ends, just Kelsey and Evan Ingram. Other than that, it's a toss-up. You could talk about Darren Waller. You could talk about Austin Hooper. You could talk about George Kittle could return. Zach Ertz. Same thing. Darren Waller, I think, has the best shot. Mark Andrews, thank you. Darren Waller has the best shot of all of those guys that I just mentioned to finish at that tight end 3 just because of the targets. I don't think there's any way, Amir, I agree, any way he finishes outside the top 5. This guy's for real. Last guy here, Tampa Bay tight end, guy that we were all so incredibly high on, particularly me and Amir, O.J. Howard. What a disappointment. He came into the season in our rankings 50th overall, made the top 50, tight end 4, and cue the sad music here, the small violin, tight end 30. He's just not being used. I'm really concerned. Are you guys concerned?
So just as Darren Waller is a riser that is going to stay above the rest, like the Rangers 1994 Stanley Cup champion banner, O.J. Howard is the falling player that is going to continue to fall. There is no regression in sight for O.J. Howard, no regression to the mean for O.J. He is skydiving. He is a player that is basically just on his way down with no parachute to help him out. I don't think it's bad. I went on the rant last week, but I guess I got to do it again. You jumped for O.J. Howard in the draft. O.J. Howard was one of the tight ends that you're like, oh, I'm going to take him with an early round pick instead of using probably a flex player or a good backup running back wide receiver. You jumped for O.J. Howard in like round 7, round 6 because you wanted to get that edge at tight end. But in reality, you find that, Darren Waller, the guy who was available in round 18, was actually more valuable than O.J. Howard. Very frustrating. And unfortunately for O.J. Howard owners, I really don't see it turning around. I mean, I guess you have to keep him because you invested so much draft capital in him, and Bryce is going to talk about how that's a sunk cost fallacy. But I mean, you're going to have to keep him on the bench. It's tough. But the man, he has not eclipsed 10 points so far this year, and the closest he came was against the lovely Giants defense, where he had 3 receptions on 4 targets for 66 yards. That's in PPR formats for those keeping track at home, in case you had a hope that in the standard league he was getting 10 points. That's not true. But yeah, O.J. Howard, it's very sad. Very sad. It's unfortunate for O.J. Howard owners, but once again, this is another systematic issue. Bruce Arians isn't using the tight end, so that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I'm also going to refer back to our video last week, the panic attack segment. I was at an 8 or a 9 out of 10 on O.J. Howard last week. This week, I'm at a 15 out of 10.
Seriously, elevator all the way to the top.
Higher than that. I mean, I'm on the International Space Station on this list. He has just been atrocious. He's been terrible this year. I don't understand how the Tampa Bay Buccaneers can score 55 points. 55, that's 2 5s back to back. And O.J. Howard gets 33 yards. He had less yards than the team had points. This is insane to me. I can't see how this gets any better for O.J. Howard. I don't know what to say. He was so hyped coming in. He's a great prospect. He was a high draft pick in the NFL draft. They're just not using him, and I don't see that getting any better.
I love the aeronautic references. I have his stock skydiving. You have your panic going up to the International Space Station. But I can tell you one thing, that O.J. Howard is not an aerial threat.
Oh, God. OJ he frustrates me. Three targets. Cameron Brate found the end zone last week. I've given up. I'm starting Austin Hooper in that league. This should tell you all you need to know about OJ Howard. I didn't pick up. I just traded for Jason Witten to replace OJ Howard. That shouldn't be. I am done. I am devoid of all happiness. I'm nihilistic towards O.J. Howard. I'm done. Guy is on my bench. I might cut him. Done.
Clearly outside the top 20 tight ends. I think he's going to finish outside the top 20. I think that's pretty clear.
He's going to finish outside the top 80,000. Awful.
On the bright side, OJ Howard is actually outscoring Bryce's dark horse tight end, Jeff Swain.
Jeff Swain got hurt.
Well, Nick Foles got hurt first.
Nick Foles did get hurt, but Gardner Minshew is a god. He's Johnny Manziel, but good. 69.42% completion rate through his first couple games. I love this man.
I hate to add to this, but it's .420 for the full effect.
Oh, he's going to be such a fun guy in Jacksonville. Apparently, he's encouraging people to grow proper mustaches now. He's a spokesman for proper mustaches.
Well, he's got one, so he's a good guy to ask.
Oh, it's perfect. And with that, we'll leave you. We hope you enjoyed this rendition of Between the 20s, the U Chicago sponsored sports business podcast. Here talking about fantasy football and our risers and fallers. We will be back soon enough with some more fantasy football talk and a quick preview of the NBA season to come as well. So stay tuned for that. We'll leave it here and we'll be happy to talk to you some more as we continue.